Hi Founder fans, Jason here, and today we're going to be talking about the Secretary of the Continental Congress. Now I make a point to say the because Charles Thomson was the only person to hold the position of Secretary of the Continental Congress throughout its existence. At a time where, people in the Continental Congress would change positions, delegates would be replaced, other clerks would find new jobs, Charles Thomson more or less made a career for 15 years of being the secretary to the Continental Congress. So, let's talk about Charles Thomson's life. What's interesting about Thomson, one of the many things that are interesting about Thomson, is he was probably the first person to speak out about British policies in North America. Even before Sam Adams and James Otis were making a big scene in Boston, Charles Thomson was in Philly and published a book. So, during the French and Indian War, not after the war like most people got on board, during the war, Thomson participated in negotiating the Treaty of Easton, which helped secure peace between the colonists and some of the Native American tribes that were siding with the French and warring with them. So, Thomson negotiates this peace, but then writes a book, and it's a lengthy title, as was customary at the time. So I can't memorize it, I need to read it. The title of this book is An Inquiry into the Causes of the Alienation of the Delaware and Shawnees Indians from the British Interest. And in this book, he basically says it's the policies you have with Native Americans that are making them so mad. We need to find a way to restrain the colonists from encroaching on the Native American lands, and we just need to find a way to be nicer to them. They're unhappy. They're upset. So years go by, and a lot more people start criticizing the British. And in 1774, the First Continental Congress is called together. And Charles Thomson, who's been outspoken this whole time, living in Philly, doesn't get elected to the Continental Congress. But the first thing the First Continental Congress does, or one of the first things, is they say, hey, like any other convention of this nature, we need a secretary to record things and take notes and help us publish papers, and let's hire someone. And that is what they did. They hired Charles Thomson as a paid job to be the secretary of the Continental Congress. And he would hold this position, as I said, for 15 years until he gave the Great Seal to the United States Congress after the Constitution was set in order. And when he did that, he actually, in essence, was the one to hand over the government to the new government. But let's backtrack a little bit. So Charles Thomson was secretary when the Declaration of Independence was approved. And I'll remind you that, the Independence was approved July 2nd of 1776, and the document, the Declaration of Independence, was approved on July 4th, but it wasn't signed until August 2nd, a month later. But they did print up copies, and they sent them to all the states, they sent them to George Washington running the army, and they wanted to make it official. So, of course, John Hancock, who's more famous for his big signature, but really should be famous for being the president of Congress and being the only signature that went out on these original publications of the Dunlap Broadsides. However, that's not true, because there was a second signature. This was an official document, and they needed it to be notarized, or as they said, attested to. And they needed a witness to do this, and as not an elected official, but a person in the room, and as secretary, Charles Thomson was one of only 2 people to sign the original declarations. It is shocking to me, as always, that more people don't know his name. So anyway, Thomson goes on, he's there for, after that, a bunch more years, over a decade. And then the new government comes into order. And Thomson says, you know what, I think I'm ready for more. And he wants a cabinet position. Now, this is a point in time where the cabinet positions were not only were they not well defined, they simply were not defined. So a position like Secretary of State was questionable. As in, should Secretary of State be both foreign policy and domestic policy? Or are those going to be 2 separate cabinet positions? They're both big jobs, and it's understandable people would ask that question. So Thomson, seeing the situation, tried to become Secretary of State, at least for domestic policy. Now, he did not realize that George Washington had his heart set on a man named Thomas Jefferson for this position, and Thomas Jefferson most certainly got this position. Unfortunately for Thomson, he didn't realize that was happening until other people had started applying to be Secretary of the United States Senate. Thomson, of course, was the incumbent. He was presumed to be the Secretary of the United States Senate, except he never applied for it. He went and tried to get this other job. And then some other people applied for it because they were like, if he's not going to do it. But anyway, Thomson finds out he's not getting Secretary of State, so he goes back to apply for Secretary of the United States Senate. Now, what should have been an easy win for him as the by far frontrunner became fairly difficult when he made some peculiar demands. First, he said he wanted an assistant, which this is a big job, and that makes sense. No one was really up in arms about that, except he specifically said he wanted an assistant so he wouldn't have to go to all of the sessions of the Senate. He would just go for, I quote, I can't quote it, I forgot the quote, but for extraordinary, very important sessions. Man, I forgot the two-word quote. But only when it was extremely important is, I believe, how he phrased it, but I'm not going to say that's the quote. And that's kind of crazy, because that's what you're here for, man. That's the job. After that, he said in a letter he wanted the title of Secretary of the Senate and of the United States. And at a time where people's titles were, like, questionable, you might remember John Adams was given a lot of grief for wanting to give George Washington a big fancy title. That was the last straw, and they decided to take in Samuel Allen Otis, who would do a great job and be Secretary of the Senate for 35 or so years. That's the end of Thomson's career. At this point, he's grown fairly old, and he decides to retire to his farm outside of Philadelphia. And that's where I'm going to leave it. This was a little bit longer video than usual, but that's Charles Thomson. Do me a favor and hit like. I want to see if we can get 10 likes on this video. That would help me out extraordinarily. I will keep making more videos, whether or not you give me likes, but I would appreciate them. Anyway, my name is Jason. Thank you so much for watching, and come back tomorrow where we will talk about another underappreciated American founder.